Shalom, all praise to Yahweh, Ba'ashim Yahushai. Double honors to our elders, which are the elders of GMS. Much love to you brothers on the four corners of the planet that continue on pushing this truth, that don't hide the penny, and keep in this thing, because these prophecies are coming to pass day by day. Because we're set up to wake the elect, and we're set up to how you say, help the brethren, grow the brethren in faith, because we have to keep faith. Esau has a great sword, man. There ain't no, if the Lord ain't with you, you ain't getting out of the clutches of Esau, man. Okay? That's why this judgment and this time of temptation is coming. So we're going to jump right into the news and just play this news as we go. And we'll see, and we'll go into the scripts afterwards or during it. But we'll go into the spirit.
The U.S. military's top commander says the Pentagon is looking at possible military responses to Russia's actions in Ukraine.
You hear that?
The U.S. military's top commander says the Pentagon is looking at possible military responses to Russia's actions in Ukraine. The chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, says America is considering different military options that haven't been considered since the end of the Cold War. During his address at the Aspen Institute, he also warned that Russian President Vladimir Putin may light a fire that he cannot control. Dempsey said the current rising tide of nationalism in Europe has been created in many ways by Russia's actions. Dempsey's comments are part of an increasingly bitter war of words between Washington and Moscow over the crisis in Ukraine and the recent crash of a Malaysian passenger jet. To discuss that further, I'm now joined by Jan Oberg, who is the founder of transnational.org, who is joining us live now via Skype from Lund. Thanks very much for joining us here on Press TV, Mr. Oberg. I wanted to ask you, about this warning, this bitter war of words between Russia and the U.S. Is there a chance that it will escalate into something substantial?
Well, I think there are a number of interpretations here. One is the statement is the kind of thing you have to do to show that you are in control and you know what's going on. Unfortunately, this is a pretty absurd statement. Secondly, of course, it could be a pretext in the sense that NATO wants to do even more in terms of moving troops, supporting the East or whatever. And the classical method has always been to show or to argue that somebody is a danger, and this somebody has for many, many years been the Soviet Union, and then for a period not Russia, but now Russia again, because of what happened in Ukraine. And Ukraine was started by the US and the neocons regime change to which Putin was responding. Now, third, I do think that we are moving towards something that sounds like a new Cold War. It will not be like the old one, but the animosity and the things being said are very, very worrying, I think, to anybody who studies the opportunities for peace. What we're seeing here is the consequence of the triumphalist policies of NATO countries since '89. We should have followed, we should have cooperated with Mikhail Gorbachev at the time, who had a vision for a disarmed, more peaceful Europe. Now comes the consequences of this arrogant, expansive policy. And that has, of course, to be legitimized and explained to people that there is a huge danger.
And speaking about the danger, I would imagine that the United States, too, is playing with fire here, considering Russia is not just any pushover country. It can fight back, can it not?
Very true. At the same time, we must not forget, and that's why I call this statement absurd, Russia's military expenditures is somewhere 7 to 8% of NATO's combined budget. Now, only a person in Moscow who is suicidal or mentally ill would start a war on that, correlation of force. So, Russia may not be a country that many people like in the West. Russia may not be the democracy we like in the West, or whatever you could blame them for, but we have also not helped them to move in the right direction. And when it comes to Ukraine, we have in the West to accept that Ukraine cannot become a full NATO member because of the security interest. You can go back to Olof Palme in the 80s and his report on common security. And Willy Brandt and the Social Democratic parties and all the people who helped rebuild the Cold War. The basic slogan was, and still is true. You cannot create security in Europe against Russia. You can only do it together with Russia. And therefore what we're doing now is utterly stupid with thinking of the future generations. But I don't think that there's any risk that Russia would start a war. What I could see is...
Alright, we're going to jump into the next video. Lower rule and I'll post the links.
Russia is being accused this afternoon of firing artillery into Ukraine from its own territory, and that put the conflict in the region at the top of the docket at the Aspen Security Forum. Joint Chiefs of Staff General Martin Dempsey says Russia's decision to escalate the attack could essentially backfire.
Russia has made a decision of that magnitude to change what has been the accepted order, the sanctity of sovereign nations. My fear is actually, if I have a fear about this, it's that Putin may actually light a fire that he loses control of. In other words, these ethnic enclaves, there's a rising tide of nationalism. And nationalism can be a very dangerous instinct and impulse.
General Dempsey says the military's role, aside from European assurance, is to determine readiness and options for the United States to react.
We'll play this last
The
one.
European Union has broadened its sanctions against Russia over the crisis in Ukraine. The new list includes 15 people and 18 entities targeted by an asset freeze and travel bans. Among the new people were top Russian intelligence officials and pro-Russian leaders in eastern Ukraine, the director of the FSB security service, Alexander Bortnikov, and the head of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, Mikhail Fratkov, are hit by the sanctions. 4 members of Russia's Security Council were also included on the new EU list. The bloc had been reluctant to adopt tougher economic sector measures backed by Washington. But since Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 disaster, things have changed. Brussels also accuses Moscow of playing a hand in the crisis in neighboring Ukraine. Russia, meanwhile, denies any involvement in the crisis. Well, to discuss that further, we're now joined by Jerome Hughes, Press TV's correspondent, who's joining us live now from
Let me read this real quick, because this situation with sanctions, that's going to cause the EU to turn on America, man, because that's going to hurt them more than anything. Slovakia. Because if they put sanctions on there and the United States doesn't deal with Russia on they don't trade like that, but these other nations do. So this is the book of Obadiah. Let's see what that says. This is the book of Obadiah 1 and verse 7. It says, all the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. How they deceived them? Because at the end of it, they're saying you have the United States telling EU to put sanctions and put sanctions. But at the end of it, they can't put sanctions because they get oil from Russia. They get energy from Russia. They do a lot of trade with Russia. So really at the end of it, when this thing heats up, they're going to go with Russia. They're going to, link up with Russia's needs, man, because they're getting something out of it. There's not a pipeline from America over to the EU. But there is a pipeline from Russia into the EU. And it says, all the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread, what is it? The bread. That's the joint measures that United States and Russia, or United States and the EU are into. Slovakia. It says, all the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. That's it on that.
Now, Jerome, how significant are these sanctions being spoken about in Brussels?
Yes, well, these sanctions, we've known about these sanctions for a while because the EU heads of government met the week before last, and these sanctions were coming down the track. The difference, I suppose, we're getting the details and we're hearing names. So we all have almost now, from the EU's perspective, almost 100 individuals on the EU sanction list. And of course, one of those you mentioned, the head of the security services, the intelligence agencies, the FSB in Russia, Alexander Bortnikov. But in terms of the substantive issue, this is not very significant. The Kremlin isn't going to be worried about more names being added. Many of the names, the EU doesn't recognise the fact that Crimea democratically voted in favour of rejoining the Russian Federation. It doesn't recognise the fact that really there are huge areas in eastern Ukraine that want to be part of Russia. So many names on the list, they call them Ukrainian, but the people themselves, those individuals that are described as Ukrainian, would consider themselves Russian. But anyway, that's a small detail. But the big question here, the big story, is the stage 3 sanctions. Now, what's been happening in the past couple of days is the ambassadors, each of the EU 28 member states of the European Union, they have individual permanent officials here in Brussels, they're ambassadors, and they've been meeting for the past couple of days to discuss stage 3 sanctions, and we're likely to have those announced on Tuesday. Now, they're not going to be implemented on Tuesday, of course. It has to be agreed by the EU heads of government. But those sanctions, they talk about capital markets. Basically, these are the financial markets. So far, what's happened is the EU have been nudging Moscow, and of course, you know, with these naming names and putting names on a sanctions list. The stage 3 sanctions, though, would get the attention of the Kremlin. And believe me, the EU does not want to find out how Vladimir Putin would react to these more severe sanctions in terms of the financial...
Now, are you seeing how the Most High is stirring them up? It's with the money, man. Because this world is so entranced by mammon, money. That's all they go for, man. That's the only thing that's going to make them move. So that's what the Lord is using to stir up all of this animosity and different things, man.
Markets. These would have an impact on Russia. You're talking about billions of euro being traded, bonds and all sorts of investments in the EU on the markets. You look at the UK, for example, a huge amount of money goes through the UK in terms of Russian investments, etc. So this would have an impact, and also the arms embargo in terms of countries like France and the UK trading arms with Russia. So that would have an impact. But the reality is they don't want to find out how Vladimir Putin, the Kremlin, would respond to these sanctions. So there's huge resistance within the EU to actually implement stage 3 sanctions. And what's going to happen is we will hear details of these so-called sanctions on Tuesday, but it'll be kicked to touch, it'll be kicked down the line. EU heads of government might announce that they might meet at the end of August. All
right, let me read these verses and we'll close out. This is the book of Jeremiah 30 and verse 13. It says, "There is none to plead thy cause, that thou mayest be bound up. Thou hast no healing medicines. All thy lovers have forgotten thee. They seek thee not, for I have wounded thee with the wound of an enemy, with the chastisement of a cruel one, for the multitude of thine iniquity, because thy sins increased." Okay, this verse right here was being spoken unto us, but now we can tie this unto Babylon the Great. What's happening now with Babylon? As you can see, it says here in verse 13, "There is none to plead thy cause, that thou mayest be bound up. Thou hast no healing medicines." When you're talking about the healing medicines that's healing this society, it's crashing. At one time, it had power. It had all these other nations under subjections, as you may say. Now these other nations are coming up against them, and it's losing its grip on power, man. Because now the EU is thinking, well, I might want to ride with Russia because I'm doing more business with them. At a point back in the day, that wasn't so. Russia wouldn't even been considered. But now the Most High is bringing them up, putting the hooks in the jaw and building them back up. Because they have oil in there, they have oil, they have all types of resources. The land of Russia is rich in resources, which a lot of these other places don't have. Verse 14, "All thy lovers have forgotten thee." Lovers is the people that was at peace with you, or confederate. Just like I read in Obadiah. And it says, "All thy lovers have forgotten thee. They seek thee not, for I have wounded thee with the wound of an enemy, with the chastisement of a cruel one, for the multitude of thy iniquity, because thy sins were increased." Why criest thou for thy affliction? Thy sorrow is incurable for thy multitude of thy iniquity. Because thy sins were increased, I have done these things unto thee. The Most High has done. You have all these homosexual, these transgenders, this wickedness that is perpetuated through the world by America and its allies. Now the Most High is judging these places and breaking it up, breaking that bond up, man. Alright, so this is the book of Jeremiah 49:7. We'll close on this one. Jeremiah 49:7. And it says, concerning Edom, thus saith the Lord of hosts, is wisdom no more in Teman? Is counsel perished from the prudent? Is their wisdom vanished? Flee ye, turn back, dwell deep, O inhabitants of Dedan, for I will bring the calamity of Esau upon him, the time that I will visit him. Alright, so now the Lord is visiting Esau. By the way, because Esau is these Edomites, mainly the top elites, which are so-called Jews, they're using America as that scapegoat. But now the Most High is visiting upon the whole power structure and he's bringing it down. And it's a beautiful thing. So this is a quick update. I don't want to make it too long. Just I seen this news story and I thought it'd be something good to bring out. And I hope you brothers were edified and I hope you learn, man. Just keep faith in Yahweh Shem Yahushai, because that's all we're going to have in these last days, is that faith that the Most High has given us, man. So with that, I'm going to say all praise to Yahweh Shem Yahushai, double honors to our elders, a great millstone. Much love to you brothers on the four corners of the planet. Shalom.